Good morning. Once again, thank you everyone for tuning in this morning. My name is Saundra Nicholson, and I'm here with a very special guest. He's returned. He was so gracious enough to grace us with his presence again once more. And that is filmmaker, writer, director, producer, and journalist, Mr. Chris L. Jenkins.
Hey, Sandra, what's happening? How you feeling?
Oh, everything is good.
Good.
Everything is fine.
Terrific.
I've been, of course, reading more about your story, and I've watched
hmm
Anthem, and I've watched Trap Cash Bell in America.
hmm
Um, I'm trying to see which one should I go with first.
Let's start with
I'll go
Anthem.
with Anthem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
start
let's
with Anthem.
start with
hmm
Anthem. Um, what I would like to know is how did you get involved with the project?
hmm Sure. So the director, Pete Nix, actually is a quarter century friend of mine. We went to Berkeley Journalism School together in the late '90s. And we've stayed in contact over the years. I went off and was a reporter and editor at the Washington Post, and he worked at Nightline and some other national news outfits, and then really sort of returned to his roots as a documentary filmmaker. And it's just really done incredible work over the years. If you haven't seen his work, again, this is Pete Nix. He is now the director of Proximities. Uh, Unscripted division. And obviously, Proximity is run by Ryan Coogler. And Pete and I have known each other for a long time, and we vowed to work with one another, particularly when I got into the documentary film game. And he knows my interests in American inequality and history, and trying to do work that really sort of stirs the pot on trying to tell the truth about sort of America. And so when he came up with the idea to really look at during the the Freedom Summer, George Floyd summer, when everybody was thinking about what we all remember, it seems like a long time ago now.
Yeah.
He had an idea to take a look at the national anthem, after all the protests, particularly Kaepernick's protests, and really realized that there had not really been an exploration of why people stand, why we stand for the national anthem, number one, what the history of the national anthem is. I mean, we sort of take it as gospel that it's this thing that we all, the people who go to ball games stand for, and we obviously did some explication of the third verse of the anthem a few years ago. So he got curious about it and asked me to come and help him produce it. And the original idea actually was to really do a history of the Star Spangled Banner. And all of its sort of, it's really fascinating, actually. I could go into that at some point if you'd like. But what the project turned into was out of, his imagination, Pete's imagination. What happens if we were to rip up the Star Spangled Banner right now and were to recreate an anthem that for America that was written today? And the gambit really was the we all know about the lyrics of the Star Spangled Banner, written by Francis Scott Key in 1814, when he was observing a battle in Baltimore Bay. The Americans won against the British, so on and so forth, and that's the lyrics of the Star Spangled Banner. But the music of the Star Spangled Banner is actually British. It's a British um, waltz tune that was composed in the late 18th century, and Francis Scott Key wrote lyrics to that tune. And so, we came to think, it's like, wait a minute, we're America, right? Like, we got all this, this music tradition, jazz, blues, field music, gospel, rock, country music, hip hop, go-go, whatever. We got all this musical forms, and we have a national anthem that is based on was written to a British song from the late 18th century. So we were like, that don't make no sense. So it became an experiment to what happens if we create a new national anthem as a sort of artistic experiment. I mean, we're not going to Congress and lobbying and whatnot. I mean, it ain't that serious. But what is serious is the conversation about symbols and our traditions and where they come from. And that's something that obviously Black folks have been challenging since we got here. But, we thought it would be an interesting conversation to have, particularly, in this post-freedom summer moment. And so, he and I, along with some other, really talented folks, Ryan Cougar was involved in helping us craft and help us get over the finish line, working with Disney and Hulu to get it sold and broadcast. But, it just became a really interesting experiment around exploring not only symbols, but also American music. Because if your viewers haven't seen it yet, what we do is we go around the country and we sample musics. We basically created a road trip with two really talented musicians. One is Chris Bowers, who's a composer, a really young Black composer, who is composed with Ava DuVernay, and just it goes on and on and on. The work that he's doing. He's he's the composer for Bridgerton with Shonda Rhimes. I mean, he's top shelf. Um, c- uh, Composer, and along with DJ Dahi, who is a hip hop producer, Kendrick Lamar, Drake, other folks. And those two guys got together and decided they were going to be the producers of this song, compose it. But we sent them on a road trip to sample music around the country, soul in Detroit, country music in Nashville, jazz in New Orleans, Native American sounds in Tulsa, blues in Clarksdale, and then Latinx music in San Francisco Bay Area. And they sample music all with the idea of how do you sort of put that into a gumbo and then create a national anthem that's based on American music. So that's the basis of the film. And it's a really interesting conversation. So it's on Hulu. I hope your viewers are interested enough with this description to check it out. But it was really eye-opening for me just to not only work with these musicians, as you watch people just create on the fly. It is so magical. And then, the film was just a remarkable opportunity to do a music film, which something I had never done, and to work with someone as talented as Pete and Ryan to bring it over the finish line.
Right. So, when I watched it, what stood out to me is when it went to Clarksdale, Mississippi. And I believe it was the brother Terrence when he said the blues was in everything. When he mentioned about the grass being cut,
Hmm.
that's the blues. And I never thought about it like that. But then he made a point of saying that some of those songs derived out of the experience of what was going on in the field. They had been chopping cotton, working, and some of those songs, obviously motivated the inspiration to sing about whatever that could have went on. That stood out to me. Also, I thought the writing session was deep because I have my own opinions about the Star Spangled Banner. As glorious as the music sound, um, and grew up singing it, of course. But, we also had our own, lift every voice and sing. That was our anthem. And of course, as time went on, that took precedent for me over then the Star Spangled Banner. And so when I was watching the film and when they were doing the writing session and the ladies that were in that room, each one, I thought that was interesting because I could relate to the girl that lived up in San
Hmm.
Francisco, and the
Yeah.
sister,
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
and the Native American woman. Everybody had their experience, and they viewed it a lot different than the young lady that was from,
Hmm.
I believe, she's from Nashville,
Nashville.
the country,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
The country
And
artist. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was obvious there was a tension there because she's like, well, I don't think, we shouldn't, criticize it. We should, take each perspective and bring it together. So I thought that was interesting because I was sitting there, I was like,
Well, it's a challenge because like when we interviewed Nicole Hannah Jones and some other folks trying to figure out, well, what is an anthem? What's the purpose of an anthem? And the purpose of an anthem, honestly, is not to be a protest song. And that was hard for, I think, Ladonia. Cecilia is her given name, but she goes by Ladonia, her stage name, and Ruby and
yeah,
Joy, the Native American sister, who is just a tremendously talented artist.
yeah,
um, but it's like, well, because we started out, I mean, we would have liked to, I think we actually showed in the, sorry, let me just get this light going. Yeah.
uh-huh,
I think we
uh-huh.
showed, that they were kind of going down the route of, well, this should be a protest song.
Right.
But the point of an anthem is to bring people together and to unify.
Together, right,
But the
right.
question becomes, well, how do you do that, if you want to tell the truth and be truthful about the spirit of America? It's a complicated one, as any country
Mhm.
would be. And so,
Absolutely.
particularly this country. And so, how do you balance trying to tell a honest truth about America, but also do one that is inclusive and is everybody? And I mean, like Nicole said, it's kind of an impossible task now. I mean, these songs and symbols that we now revere, or some of us revere, or as were created at a time when there was only an opportunity for one, perspective to was allowed to have the power, right? And so trying to do that in 2020, which we did this in 2021, you know, it's pretty hard. But I think the idea obviously was less about the destination and more about the conversation, getting there, about how do you wrestle. I think, look, neither Pete nor I nor Ryan or anybody else are naive about, what's going on, in our country, the backlash and all the things that we know always happen, going all the way back to Reconstruction and the Nadir and the backlash to the Civil Rights Movement. It's always a backlash. And so I think every generation needs to be reminded of that. So we're not naive to the fact that, one song or even one conversation is not going to move the needle. But we thought it was important to enter this into the conversation too, because amongst the producers, there were some producers who were like, "Why don't we don't need Charity." Charity Bowden was the woman from. She's actually originally from Alabama, but we met her in Nashville. She's the country singer who was sort of defending the national anthem or the Star Spangled Banner because it means something to her and her family, who was lots of
Right.
military folks and so forth. Obviously we wanted to be inclusive, like, and there was some debate amongst the producers, like, well, do we really need someone like her? Like, why don't we just do our own thing? And I actually believed, look, we can't be from this perspective for this project. I didn't think that we needed to do what the other side does, which is to exclude. We need to be the North Star, and at least for this conversation, try to be inclusive, because we need to project the values that we think that we fight for, which is inclusivity. And so we have to have this tough conversation. And so, to the extent to which, it made a dent in anybody's thinking, I don't know, but, the effort was to try to lead with integrity, try as hard as we could to respect the values that we profess, which is one of inclusivity, democracy, inclusion, so on and so forth. Like, those are the things that we fight for, and so we have to do that as part of our, at least in this case, our artistry. And so that's how sort of Anthem was created. It was a lot of fun, actually. So.
Yeah, interesting. I enjoyed it. I liked it. It made me think about a few things when I was watching it, especially when they got to that writing section. I was like,
Hmm.
this is interesting.
Right.
Um, I watched Trapped Cash Bill in America, and I must say, I shedded some tears. It moved
It's a tough
me.
film. Yeah.
That's yeah. a very powerful film. Kudos again to you. And watching that, what inspires you to move in the direction that you do when it comes to choosing projects uh, that are controversial,
Hmm.
um, and yet very liberating,
Hmm.
just knowing that there's somebody who cares, because you
Hmm.
have to care in
Yeah.
order to get involved and helping others and humanity. I made a statement some years ago, and that is, you have to be willing to be even inconvenienced sometimes when it comes to helping someone who can't maybe help
Yeah.
themselves. That may require for you to step out of your box, your circle. And a lot of times it's not always easy. And I have learned in my own experience is that there's not too many people that are really willing to rock the boat in order to get something done that could benefit uh, a marginalized
Hmm.
community.
Hmm.
Particularly in our case, it seems to always be, the colored, black, or people who are poor. That's you know what I'm saying.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. So a couple things. I mean, I can't remember if we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I started my work career at 22 as a social worker in the Bronx, working with foster care teenagers,
yeah,
and when you're a social worker, I mean, you obviously start with the human beings. I mean, there are systems in place, obviously, that lead to people being distressed, or in this case, kids being in foster care. This was in the early 90s. So we're talking about teenagers that had basically watched their parents descend into, the maw of the crack epidemic, right? So I was dealing with kids who were born in the mid 70s, and then we're 10, 11, 12, 13 when the crack epidemic really sort of hit in New York, right? And so so much of my foundation as a storyteller has to do with that experience of starting with the people, starting with people's voices, starting with people's experiences. And as a social worker, you're not storytelling, but you are advocating, and you are digging into the issues of what a human being is dealing with, and trying to be an activist and advocate for them. And so that's really why I got into journalism, was to be able to tell those stories. Now, fast forwarding to Trapped, you know what I quickly realized, so first things first. So I was an editor for criminal justice issues when I was at the Washington Post. My last job there was criminal justice editing, and so I was dealing with a lot of those crime stories that that newspapers do, and which is, that's a whole different story. But how media treats the criminal justice system and believes everything that the state says about what happened. Right? You never rarely get a sense about what the human beings say. Whether it's the victims of quote unquote crime or the actual quote unquote people who are alleged to have committed crimes. So I was always a little uncomfortable with that. I was like, we're just listening to these, to the state. And so when the idea for Trapped came along, it was I sort of combined my frustration with with being an editor, and sort of reporting what the state says, and combining that with my sort of impulses, which is to highlight the lives of people, and their circumstances, is how I sort of got the inspiration to begin this project on Trap. Now, the one thing about, just for your listeners, and your viewers, Trapped is a feature documentary that explores the cash bail system in America, and just the incredible inequity and inhumanity that goes into what happens when someone is arrested and then is forced to pay a amount of money in order to get out of jail. Right. And so if you don't have the money, and so a lot of usually very low level misdemeanor crimes, if you don't have the money to pay a quote unquote cash bail, a bail amount that is higher than what you can afford, you stay in jail only because you can't pay, not because you allegedly did something terrible, or that you haven't even been found guilty, because you haven't been found guilty yet, you or innocent, you haven't had your day in court. You have simply been arrested, and you've been and sometimes indicted. Now, if someone who has more money than you is charged with the same crime, they can get out, but it's only based on how much money you have, not on anything else but that. And so that's where the injustice happens, is that essentially, we are keeping people in jail based on how much money they have, not on anything else having to do with the severity of the crime, or whether there's any probable cause or any of that stuff. So that's what the story goes into, what the film goes into, and we profile several people who have been quote unquote trapped in these circumstances. And so, one of the things I noticed about, a lot of criminal justice documentaries was that they dealt with the the conditions in prison, or what happens after you've left prison, and the difficulties of people, getting back on their feet. But there had never really been a film that explored what happens before you even get there. Like, you know, like, and usually it's hard to do those films because you can't get cameras in jail, you can't, like a lot of times people just sort of evaporate into the maw of the criminal justice system, so it's hard to actually capture those stories. And so it was really important for me and my producing partner to, document someone who was in that moment when they had been arrested, they didn't have enough money to get out of jail, and they're in jail for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months, waiting for their day in court. Meanwhile, if they have kids, those kids are in foster care, or they're being taken care of by somebody else. They lose their job, they lose their apartment. Their entire life has been disrupted by a system that that essentially only judges whether what happens to you if you have enough money in the bank. And that's sort of what was the clear inhumane and unjust circumstances that hundreds of thousands of people are faced with every single day. And honestly, the reason why so many people are in jail right now is because they can't pay their bails. And there are 500,000, 600,000 people in jail any given day in America. Estimates between 50 and 60% of those people are in jail only because they can't pay their bail. And and that gets into all kinds of questions about who's profiting off of this. Who, like, why is this? And when it comes to America, all you got to do is follow the money. We know that. The answer to all your questions usually is money. And when you think about it that way, it's just a perverse system. And so that's how I got into, why I wanted to highlight people's voice. Like, so, Sandra, you've seen the film Brianna and William, and the women that who were in jail in Philadelphia, and the Mama's Day bailout came to get them out. The film also goes into the activists who are really trying to bring change to this. And so it was a really timely film because it came out in the Freedom Summer in October of 2020, and so there was a lot of interest in it. And I think it did move. I think that film did actually move the needle in some significant ways. And we've seen some movement in terms of eliminating cash bail in cities, counties, and states around the country, which is a really important movement in terms of justice and freedom for people.
Yeah, I was impressed with Mary Hooks and her group, the ladies, and how they all came together to bail those ladies out of the jail, and that was moving. And it affects a lot of people, even the young family, the young white girl whose her parents were taking care of her children, and she, there she is, and I like that you highlight the fact that her attorney was like, "No, don't plead guilty. Let's fight this." And because it's like take a stand. And they know that most people, because they don't want to spend that much more time in jail, so they just go along and and then I thought it was interesting the businessmen who make the profit off of the bill and how they're fighting against SB 10. And I thought that was interesting too. And I was sitting there and said, people are always trying to make a profit. They're trying to
Yes,
make a profit.
just follow the money. Just follow the money. whether it's the state, because they're trying to fund local governments off the backs of poor people, or the private bail industry, which is backed by insurance, surety companies that are making billions of dollars over the last 10 years off of the backs of poor people, like one this really astute, smart attorney who's been fighting this stuff for years, Alec Karakatsis, said, it's a wealth transfer. It is a wealth transfer from poor people to rich people. That's all it is. Off the backs and off the basis of criminal justice. It's like, yo, no, it's not. These people. Look, you could make an argument that if someone has been charged with a really heinous crime, all right, we can argue about whether that is someone that or it has a some so has had a history of skipping bail or some other things. Okay, but that's not the most majority of people who are arrested or indicted every day. We're talking about low level crimes, usually crimes of poverty. You know, yes, drug dealing or for low level charges, things like that. That's the majority of people who are arrested in this country every day, and those are most of the people who are ensnared in this stuff. So we're not talking about, letting out, people who have committed heinous crimes. We're not talking about that. That's a small percentage of people, and that's the pushback from, the criminal justice, lovers. It's like, well, you're gonna let out criminal? No, 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 no. Not, we're not talking about that. You have no answer for the woman who writes a bad check. Okay, and she's in jail for 6 months because she has no money, which is the reason why, by the way, she wrote the bad check, allegedly. So like, yo, like, what are we doing here? It's like, so that's, you can see, how, even 4 years later, I was working on that film 6 years ago. It's still, an incredibly pernicious and, just, it's enraging, the circumstances that people get themselves into because of, this cycle of poverty and all of the things that, leads to these circumstances that the criminal justice system just exacerbates through cash bail.
Wow. I'll say, do you have time for one question? Do
Sure.
you have time? Okay. If anyone, well, Mark said, because Mark watched the film, Mark
Hey,
said,
Mark, thank you.
he said he stood on facts. He definitely enjoyed. If anyone have any questions, you have a good 3 minutes. I can ask it for you, or I can bring you into the room if you have any questions. Any?
There's little static
any-
on his end, it looks like.
I don't know. It's clear on
Oh,
my end.
it is? Okay.
Yeah, it's clear. It's clear on my end. It sounds like a walkie-talkie
It does.
somewhere
Yeah.
is in the
Yeah,
background.
yeah,
It
yeah,
does.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know who's trying to listen in.
Mm-hmm. No problem. No problem.
um,
Yeah, but
well,
Sandra,
I have.
you always ask great questions. I really appreciate the fact that you not
Oh,
only watched
oh, thank
the films but
you.
also engaging questions. And you obviously have got me animated on a Friday morning, which is
Well,
great because
I do have one question,
yeah.
and that is, do you see yourself ever venturing off into making films outside of documentaries, like dramas or
hmm I am.
nonfiction?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I am actually working on a scripted project right now, television series, which hasn't been announced yet, so
yeah, yeah,
I can't
yeah, yeah.
divulge all the ins and outs of it. But so the short answer to your question is yes. Scripted projects are something that I hope is a big part of my future. Hopefully, I'll be able to announce, and we can come back and talk about that once it is announced. Hopefully this fall. But yeah, I mean, I think there is. I actually never imagined myself being a TV producer. That's the last thing I ever would have imagined myself doing, quite frankly. But there's so much freedom um, in terms of the creative process. Look, there are always going to be guardrails, in life, and when you're doing commercial projects. but it does allow for more. When you want to get at history and drama, there are some limitations around documentary film, depending on what kind of footage you have, archival, being able to bring things to life through the moving image. What's beautiful about the scripted world is recreating and using your imagination, particularly when you're trying to deal with Black issues or African American issues or justice issues. Your imagination can really run wild. And so, I'm looking forward to being able to get into that stream of things, and hopefully I'll be able to talk about that before the end of the year.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I know there are two documentaries I want to make, and
Okay.
one deals with why do we go through all of this, but I can't
Uh-huh.
discuss it out
Uh-huh.
here.
I hear you.
I
I
can,
hear you.
I can message you and tell it, but I can't give it out over the airwaves.
Okay.
Well, Chris, thank you
Thank you, Saundra.
again. Thank you so much
Really
for
appreciate you.
sharing your time.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. But
Yeah.
I appreciate you. I appreciate your willingness to share your insight, your knowledge, your experience, your journey, not only with myself, but with our viewing audience. And on that note, until next time, I want to thank
Next
everyone who
time.
tuned in
Thank you.
again to listen to this brilliant man who's advocating for us. He's using his gifts through film, through writing, and directing and producing. And we thank you for you being
And
you.
thank you, Sandra. Really appreciate you. All right. Well, let's do this again sometime soon. Okay.
Yes, most definitely. That's most
Okay.
definitely. Well, until next time,
Okay.
everyone take care. Have a blessed day and a great weekend.
Have a
And
great
see
weekend,
you
everybody.
next time.
Bye
And
bye.
into the room. Bye bye.